Welcome, everybody, to a special Christmas edition of the Big Sky Now podcast. We're here in the holiday spirit, ready to break down some FCS football for you. So I am your host, Josh Amick, and for the first time in a couple of weeks, we have the full panel back. As people like to say, the band is back together. So Fritz, John, Mark, and Ian is back from last week's hiatus to join us. We're going to jump right into it. The game that we were all looking forward to was the Bobcats against South Dakota, or that is up for debate. We'll see what the panel says. But Bobcats looked in control the entire time, 131-17. What was the thing that stood out to you most in this game, Fritz? We all know that you were there covering this game. Was it Mellott's play? Was it the defense holding up pretty well? What stood out to you the most in this game?
The thing that comes to mind is for the second straight week, Tommy Mellott had just a fantastic run, a game-breaking run. Last week, it was late in the first half. He had that 63-yard scramble where he didn't think he was going to go anywhere, and he just set him up with the touchdown right before halftime. This time, they're up 24-14. They trade punts, and then he had a play where the snap was a little bit off to his right, and he bounced it off the turf, and it came back to him, and he jab-stepped, and off he went. As he pointed out, and I didn't notice until he pointed it out, he got a great block from Scottrey Humphrey because the D end was coming in hard. And there was a hole up the middle. He leaped over a guy and he went 41 yards and made it 31-14. And that, I think, really was the key play of the game. He's just got a knack for making these plays. He's a senior. He's been around for a long time and he's only gotten better. He was pretty damn good as a freshman. So that's what stood out to me.
Yeah, and that's definitely a key play because it seemed like South Dakota's defense was stepping up in the second half. Those were the only points that they allowed throughout the entire second half, giving up 24 points in the first half. But this just kind of how the offense has started games for me has been the key, just the entire playoffs. The defense hasn't stepped onto the field in a tie game after the first drive since the UC Davis game. They've come out, started the game with the ball, and scored a touchdown in every game since they played UC Davis. So, I mean, when you start the game off up 7-0 before your defense takes the field, you're already giving yourself an advantage. And for them to be able to keep doing that as the teams get better and better throughout the playoffs, it's just a massive key to their game style. You know, you play from ahead, you can run your offense the way you want to. It can allow you to hand the ball off, you can pass it, you can kind of draw teams in with the play action. So, yeah, that's one of the big keys to me, and just how the offense gets their starts.
John just mentioned the South Dakota defense in the second half. I wanted to give some credit to the MSU defense in that second half, especially in that fourth quarter late in the game to help put the win away for them. Got 2 fourth down stops, one on the 4th and 13 where they got 12 yards and almost got it, but they still got off the field there, and then another one on 4th and 10. Also only allowed 3 points in that second half, and both of those fourth down stops were in the red zone as well. So stepping up in key moments. Even though they gave up about 200 yards of offense in that second half, they were able to get off the field when it was really important.
Yeah, I mean, Montana State was in control, obviously, most of the game. It did get a little dicey there in the fourth quarter. North Dakota turning the ball over on downs twice late in Montana State. You know, if they score on one of those, then it's a 1-score game. And then, you know, you start kind of chewing the fingernails and stuff like that. Montana State scored on their first possession of the third quarter on that, you know, Tommy Mellott making a touchdown Tommy play. And then they go 4 punts on their next 4 possessions. So they didn't move the ball that well, you know, in the second half against North Dakota. And part of that is, you know, they're playing with the lead and they're trying to, you play a little differently when you're trying to kind of finish the game out. So, I mean, generally they were in control, but it was tied in the first half at 14. And so, and like Fritz mentioned last week, that Tice for North Dakota, he is a load. You are right. So, you know, Montana State kind of did what Montana State does and got the win, and hopefully they got one more in them in a couple weeks.
Yeah, speaking of Tommy Mellott, he was obviously the player of this game, but this has now been kind of a theme so far in the playoffs where he has been the leading rusher for the Bobcats, especially these last 2 games. Is it concerning that you have your quarterback leading your team and rushing, or is this kind of by design with teams maybe overplaying the run. John, what do you think?
I don't want to say it's by design to have him carrying the ball 20 times, 17 this last weekend, but I feel like when you kind of get into a game, you see how it's playing out. If maybe South Dakota's defense was bottling up like they did Scott Humphrey, hold him to just under 40 yards. Adam Jones was the second leading rusher. He had 68 yards on 18 carries. So if you need to kind of get him a lot into the rushing game, it allows Vegan to kind of open up that play calling. And it might not even just be designed runs. It could be, read options. It could be just rolling the pocket out and him using his eyes and seeing space and running, or a bobbled snap that turns into a broken play and he takes it for 41 yards to the end zone. So, but the one thing I would be a little bit concerned about if I'm a Bobcat fan is seeing him trying to leap defenders and making jukes instead of trying to just go down and save his body. But, he's a football player. He's going to make moves. He's going to try to get yards. Tommy Mellott's a butte tough kid, and he's going to make those plays.
Yeah, I agree. I think it'd be a little more concerning if we were in like the early weeks of the season and he was carrying the ball this much, where there's a lot more games left to play. But I mean, at this point, there's only one more game left. You can run him as much as you want as long as he doesn't get injured, like we've seen in the last couple of postseason runs for him. But at this point, yeah, you just got to keep it going if it's working. You don't want to keep him out, take the ball out of his hands, especially with how successful he's been on the ground the last couple of weeks. So yeah, I don't have a problem with them running the ball, especially when you're going for a national championship.
Yeah, Josh, you asked at the beginning, is it kind of concerning that he's doing this much running, or is it by design? And the answer is yes to both of them.
Yeah.
I mean, they had stated, or other people knew it. Jason Eck knew it, that they were trying to, not run him as much during the regular season, so he'd be, upright for the playoffs. And it's kind of played out, kind of how they scripted it. I mean, still, as great as he is, as fast as he is, and elusive and all that stuff, you still kind of cringe when he takes, when he rounds the corner and only takes one hit, and that changes everything. I mean, was it the national title game in 21? He got knocked, he got injured in the first series, and that changed a lot of stuff there too. So it is ideally they'd like, Jones and Humphrey to kind of take more of those hits, but if they're not, getting chunks of yardage, if they're maybe, other teams keying on them, then maybe that kind of opens it up for him. And, for better or for worse, so far it's been better. And so, like Ian said, they only got one more game. So they get, that's it.
Yeah, I think it's notable that the first time Tommy Mellott ran, he laid down. He didn't lay down, he slid before he took the big contact. And I thought it was funny because, I wrote my story. I wrote 1,500 words on Saturday. And then I looked at Casey Kreider, our photographer's photos, and I'd forgotten about that run he had down inside the floor where he front flipped over a tackler, tried to leap him and got clipped and did a front flip. And I think everybody, all 20,000 people gasped. But, we're at this point where, I think the Bobcats got away with having the threat of the +1 runner, which is Mellott, and being able to get 1,000 yards each out of Adam Jones and Scott Humphrey. And now the going gets tough, and he's at 300, 100-yard rushing games this season. 2 have come in the playoffs. It's time for him to keep the ball a bit more and make plays and give him that little extra edge. Now it's not a threat anymore. It's a real deal. They're +1, and when they need Tommy to run, and hopefully he doesn't get hurt, then he's there for it.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned those photos, Fritz, because we watched some of the game here at the office, but I was looking at Casey's photos. There's a photo of him getting front flipping. There's a photo of him a lot hurdling somebody. So I was just like, this guy's just laying it all out for his team when it matters. So great photos by Casey, by the way. Shout out to him. But yeah, a lot's putting it all on the line. So it's great to see. And like Ian mentioned, just one game left. Got to do what it takes to win the championship. But moving on, taking off our Big Sky hat for a moment and moving on to the other Final Four team was North Dakota State beating South Dakota State 28-21. Some people might think it was an upset, but North Dakota State was at home. And it was the Cam Miller and Bryce Lance show. Did this game go as you expected? I know Ian and John had North Dakota State winning, but the other three went the other way. So did this game kind of go as you expected, Ian?
To start off, I want to know what Bryce Lance ate for breakfast that day. I mean, 3 touchdowns and that one handed to win that game at the end there. But it kind of surprised me. I expected it to be a little more of a ground game. That might just be me kind of thinking of NDSU as that ground and pound team, but we'll get into it a little later in the next episode. But they have been throwing the ball a little bit more, so that jumped out to me. I expected it close, and I mean, this game delivered. It was back and forth the whole time. It was a really fun one to watch.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all thought it would be a close game, maybe not as high scoring as it turned out. I mean, the way it was starting out, I mean, South Dakota State was up 14-7 and had the ball back on a punt, and that fumble in their own territory. I mean, that kind of turned the tide big time, because North Dakota State scored right after that, got the momentum, and it seemed like they were just kind of one step ahead of South Dakota State the rest of the game. I was kind of surprised that South Dakota State wasn't able to run the ball as well as they usually do against North Dakota State. And so I thought that was kind of a key part of the game too.
Yeah, I obviously I picked against North Dakota State, but they're for real. Cam Miller is a great quarterback. I thought, well, today I learned when I rewatched the game that Cam Miller and SDSU's great linebacker Adam Bach were high school teammates. And Adam Bach put some wood to Cam Miller. Speaking of guys who were counting on to run the ball maybe a little bit extra, Cam Miller ran the ball a lot, and he took some hits, took more hits than Tommy Mellott did, including one that was just a tad out of bounds. I didn't like that call. It was a key play in the game where Adam Bach got a 15-yard penalty for late hit, where Cam Miller was running up the sidelines and took a full stride, but it was about 6 inches out of bounds. And Bach put the wood to him and got a 15-yarder, and it turned into a 40-yard gain instead of a 25-yard gain. That said, yeah, I picked SDSU, but Cam Miller's for real, and I knew it was going to be close. I knew either team could win, and I guessed wrong.
Fair enough.
I don't think that there really was a wrong pick with this one. It really could have been a pick 'em regardless. Both teams are for real. It's hard to pick against a 2-time defending national champion, even if they are going on the road at their rival. So I just kind of made my pick based on the home field advantage of it. But yeah, that game delivered exactly what I expected. Like it was mentioned before, there was no separation between the teams. It felt just counter punch the entire time. Bryce Lance just had an absolutely incredible day receiving, getting 3 touchdowns. Cam Miller, on the ground as well as through the air, so showed his dual threat abilities there. And yeah, just that game was, I feel like that game was maybe the best game on Saturday across any level of college football.
Well, I want to thank John for bringing up this last topic we have to discuss, because I feel like it's interesting. We are the Big Sky Now podcast, so we've been covering Big Sky all year, talking about Montana State all year as they've been undefeated, bringing up the Grizzlies. We go out there a lot to cover the games. But after the North Dakota State, South Dakota State game, quarterback Cam Miller said in his post-game interview that I hate losing to this team and I hate the Jackrabbits. With how this last game was and how the last couple of games have been played, has this rivalry between these two teams passed Montana State versus Montana as the best rivalry in the FCS, or is it still those two teams, Mark?
I don't know. I mean, they're both really good rivalries. I mean, we being in Big Sky Country, we probably didn't pay attention to the North Dakota State, South Dakota State rivalry until just recently. And it's probably ramped up in the last, 6 or so years, since South Dakota State's gotten good. I mean, it probably wasn't as much of a rivalry when North Dakota State was winning and all the time. So, you'd probably have to ask somebody back there, but I'm sure it's been a pretty, big time rivalry, back there, because they have a lot of Dakota kids playing on both sides. We just haven't noticed, because it's only been recently the Big Sky teams have been kind of playing against them, and they've had to go against each other and stuff. I mean, I'm sure, obviously Cat-Griz is a big time rivalry, and it still is. I mean, you ask Bobby Houck, ask him at your own risk. If he's happy about losing 6 of the last 8 to Montana State, when Montana's owned that rivalry. I think I've kind of tried to ask them that, and at the Big Sky football kickoff, I usually try to keep my distance just in case he wants to come over the top of the table at me, but he usually responds with saying something like Montana overall in the whole 100 years plus years of the series has won most of the games. So he kind of diffuses the fact that Montana State has beaten him most of the time in the last few years. So I don't know. It's kind of nice to see a different rivalry. So I would say couldn't go wrong with either one.
Yeah, it's pretty lopsided overall, but yeah, that was one of the funnier things that happened after the Cat-Griz game. Is one of the writers asked Bobby about how I felt about being 2-4 in his last 6 against the Bobcats. He says, I'd much rather be 6-0, and the NDSU-SDSU rivalry doesn't go back as far, but if I was an SDSU fan, I would be pretty burnt about them winning whatever it was, 8 out of 9 or 10 out of 11. They just really ruled the roost for a long time. And the only thing that would bother me if I was an SDSU fan is those uniforms. I mean, I didn't think it was possible to make green and yellow not match, but the Bison pulled it off. Those uniforms are terrible. They're terrible.
I can jump in on uniforms here because I'm a big fan of color versus color. If you're going to play a rivalry game, you should have a differentiating color. So maybe they could have busted out the yellow uniforms to go against the blue. But that's me being picky. I definitely would. I've grown up in Montana my whole life. Like Mark was mentioning, we're in this area, so we see Cat-Griz a lot more. It's Montana's Super Bowl. Everyone's got a side for it. The whole state shuts down. It feels like on the when those two teams meet up. So, in my opinion, it's still going to be the best in FCS and one of the best across the entire country, regardless. But I want to give some love to that one because it has been a competitive rivalry recently. Both teams are getting up there, and the Dakota State schools are the top of the FCS right now, and Montana State's trying to usurp them this year. So, but then I also want to give a little bit of a love to some other the old rivalries. Lehigh and Lafayette out there in Pennsylvania, the oldest rivalry in the country.
Engineers, yeah.
Harvard and Yale. So the Northeast has got some good football rivalries also. So, I think it all comes down to just kind of regional biases in that regard.
This might be just recency bias for me, but I mean, how often do you see someone say, "I hate my rival" on like live TV after the game? That really jumped out to me. Like that was like, okay, I'm in on this rivalry. This is impressive. But yeah, no, I think it's very just kind of subject to where you live regionally. I grew up on the East Coast, so I'm learning about all these West Coast or out West rivalries. It's been really fun to learn about. I figured that the two teams from North and South Dakota probably wouldn't like each other. I didn't think they would be, I hate this team on national TV levels of hate each other. So that was cool to see. And yeah, no, it's definitely on par with the Cat-Griz game as well.
Appreciate you acknowledging that, Ian, because it seemed like we're all kind of playing the fence. Like, there's a lot of good rivalries out there. I wanted someone to just say, no, this is, at the moment, it's the best one because the Montana games have not been close as of late, but that's why they call it recency bias. So that is going to wrap up this episode of The Big Sky Now. We will not have an episode on Thursday as it is Christmas break, and we'll have a week off until the FCS Championship game. So we'll be back the week of January to break down the championship game and what we're all expecting for that game. So make sure you tune in to that. We wish you all have a happy holidays and a great new year. Thank you to my panel for joining me as always. We'll see you all next year on another episode of the Big Sky Now podcast. Until then, take care.